The first thing I saw when I pulled into my driveway that morning was my gun safe sitting in the back of a white maintenance truck. My gun safe, the 800-pound steel box that had been bolted into the concrete floor of my ranch office for 12 years. Two men in HOA uniforms were struggling to secure it with chains while another man stood beside my front gate, holding a clipboard like he had every legal right to be there. I killed the engine. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. Then the man with the clipboard looked directly at me and smiled. "Morning, Mr. Carter. We're taking possession of this." I stared at him through my windshield. "You're taking possession of what?" He pointed toward the truck. "You're safe." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because the alternative was getting out of my truck and making a very bad decision. I stepped out slowly. The Texas heat was already climbing, and the gravel beneath my boots cracked with every step. "You have about 10 seconds to tell me why my property is being loaded into an HOA truck." The man lowered his clipboard. "Your property is subject to an enforcement action." "An enforcement action?" "Yes!" He said it like those two words were supposed to scare me. They didn't. What worried me was something else. The safe door was still locked, and whoever had removed it had somehow managed to get past the steel security cage surrounding my office without cutting a single lock. That meant somebody had either obtained my keys, or somebody inside my own security system had helped them. I looked past the men toward my ranch house. The front door was closed. Every window looked intact. Nothing appeared disturbed, but my instincts told me something was very wrong. I walked closer to the truck. "Who authorized this?" The clipboard man handed me a document. "HOA emergency property seizure." I glanced at the paper. It had my name, my address, a case number, and a signature from the HOA president. But there was one problem. The signature was fake. I knew that because I had personally watched the HOA president sign documents before. And more importantly, I had seen that exact signature 3 weeks earlier. On another document. A document connected to the investigation I had been quietly building against her. I folded the paper. "Put my safe back." The man shook his head. "Can't do that." "Then call the sheriff." "We already did." That stopped me. I looked toward the road. A black and white sheriff's SUV was parked near the entrance to the subdivision. The driver's door opened. Deputy Miller stepped out. He was a broad-shouldered man in his 40s whom I'd seen around the county for years. He walked toward us with one hand resting near his radio. "What's going on here?" The HOA representative immediately stepped forward. "Deputy, we're executing an authorized property recovery." Miller looked at me. "Mr. Carter." I nodded. "You know anything about this?" "I know those men are stealing my safe." The HOA representative immediately protested. "It's not theft. The OA has a lawful order." Miller looked at the paper, then at me, then back at the paper. "Do you have a court order?" The man's confidence dropped slightly. "We have an enforcement authorization." "That's not what I asked." Silence. Miller held out his hand. "Let me see it." The representative handed him the document. The deputy studied it for several seconds. Then his eyes narrowed. "Who issued this?" "The OA board." "That isn't a court." The representative swallowed. "Well, I have legal authority under the community covenants." Miller looked at the safe. "Does the covenant specifically authorize removal of personal safes from private property?" The man didn't answer. One of the guards stepped forward. "Sir, we've been instructed to remove it." Miller turned toward him. "Then you're going to stop until I verify the instructions." The guard looked toward the HOA representative. That tiny glance told me more than any confession could have. They weren't sure anymore, neither was I. Because this wasn't random. The HOA had been after my property for months. It started with a fence, then my barn, then the cattle, then an accusation that my ranch violated neighborhood appearance standards. That accusation would have been ridiculous if the HOA hadn't already tried to force me into selling part of my land. My property sat on nearly 40 acres along the eastern edge of the development. Before the subdivision existed, my family had owned that land. The HOA was created years later when developers built houses around us. The original agreement clearly separated my ranch parcel from the residential association. At least, that's what the county records showed. But 6 months earlier, HOA President Evelyn Harper had suddenly claimed my entire property was subject to association rules. At first, I assumed it was just another power-hungry board president. Then I discovered something much more serious. Someone had altered a property map. A boundary line had been moved. A document had been filed with the county suggesting that a section of my ranch belonged to the HOA, and that section contained something extremely valuable. An old underground access easement connected to a future commercial development. I had started looking into the paperwork, quietly. Professionally, I didn't tell the neighbors. I didn't confront Evelyn, and I definitely didn't tell the HOA board what I did for a living. Because my day job wasn't ranching. I was a detective, and the case I had been investigating wasn't officially assigned to me. It had started as a favor to a county investigator who suspected fraudulent property filings were connected to a larger scheme. The more records we uncovered, the stranger it became. And eventually one name kept appearing. Evelyn Harper, the same woman now standing beside my driveway while her employees tried to steal my safe. I looked at her across the gravel. She'd arrived moments earlier in a black luxury SUV. Perfect hair, white blouse, dark sunglasses, and the kind of smile people wore when they believed they had already won. She removed her sunglasses. "Mr. Carter, this doesn't need to become dramatic." I smiled. "Then why are you stealing my property?" "I'm protecting the community." "No, you're protecting yourself." Her expression changed, only for a second, but I saw it, fear, then anger. You've been violating association rules for years. I've never been a member of your association. She stepped closer. You don't get to decide that. I don't have to. I pulled my phone from my pocket. I have county records. She laughed. You think paperwork is going to save you? No, I looked at the sheriff's deputy. I think evidence will. Her smile disappeared. One of the guards suddenly shouted from the truck. Everyone turned. The rear doors of the maintenance truck were open. The safe was inside, but the chain holding it had slipped. The enormous steel box shifted several inches. The truck tilted under the weight. Miller shouted for everyone to move back. The guards jumped away. The safe slammed against the side wall with a deafening metallic crash. For a moment, nobody moved. Then the truck's rear suspension gave a violent groan. The safe was one impact away from falling onto the gravel. I stepped forward. Get everyone away from that truck. Miller immediately started moving people back. The HOA representative was pale. I watched the safe carefully, because I knew exactly what was inside. Not weapons, not cash, something far more dangerous to the people standing in my driveway. Evidence, documents, photographs, a backup drive, and a copy of every suspicious property filing I had collected. The safe wasn't valuable because of what it was. It was valuable because of what it contained, and whoever ordered its removal knew that. I looked at Evelyn. She was staring at the safe. Not the truck, not the guards, the safe. And suddenly I understood. They hadn't come for my property, they had come for my evidence. I walked toward her. You made one mistake. She stared at me. What mistake? I lowered my voice. You came to the wrong house. She smiled again, but this time I could see she was forcing it. You're going to regret threatening me. I didn't threaten you. I glanced at the deputy. I warned you. Then I turned toward my house, because there was something Evelyn didn't know. The safe wasn't my only copy, and the camera hidden above my office door had recorded every second of their arrival. Every face, every vehicle, every word. And most importantly, the moment Evelyn Harper gave the order to take it. I had been investigating her for 3 months. Now she had just handed me the strongest piece of evidence I could have asked for. But as I reached my front porch, a message appeared from an unknown number. Stiopai investiguti HOA. A second message arrived immediately. Yo have no idea bota asb hiedtais. I stared at the screen, then came the third message. Shiki uu barn. I looked across the pasture. The red barn stood about 100 yards away. Its doors were open. I knew I had locked them that morning. I slowly reached for my sidearm, and for the first time that day, I wasn't worried about the OA. I was worried about who had entered my property while everyone was watching the safe. I stood on the porch staring at the open barn doors. The wind moved through the dry grass, carrying dust across the pasture. Nothing else moved. No truck. No person. No animal. Just the barn doors swinging slowly against their hinges. Behind me, Deputy Miller was still dealing with the HOA guards. I turned toward him. Deputy, I need you to stay here. He looked at me. Why? My barn door was locked this morning. His expression changed. You think someone broke in? I know someone did. Miller immediately reached for his radio. Stay where you are. I'll check it. I shook my head. No. We're going together. He studied my face. You armed? Yes. Then keep your weapon holstered unless there's an immediate threat. Understood. We crossed the pasture together. The grass reached almost to my knees in some places. Every few steps I looked toward the tree line, nothing. But the closer we got to the barn, the stronger my instincts became. The padlock was lying in the dirt, not broken. Cut cleanly. I crouched beside it. Miller examined the lock. Professional cut. I nodded. That's what I thought. We entered the barn. Sunlight came through gaps in the wooden walls, illuminating floating dust. My cattle shifted nervously in the adjoining pen. The main equipment area looked normal. Tractor, feed sacks, tool cabinets. Nothing appeared disturbed. Then I saw the office door. It was open. I stopped. My office had a deadbolt. Someone had forced it. Miller raised his hand. Stay behind me. He stepped inside. I followed. The desk drawers were open. Files had been pulled from cabinets. A computer monitor was lying face down. And on the floor was an empty wooden box. I recognized it immediately. It had contained a portable hard drive. The backup drive that held copies of my investigation. My stomach tightened. They hadn't been searching randomly. They knew exactly what they wanted. Miller looked at me. What was on that drive? Evidence. Evidence of what? I didn't answer immediately, because I knew the moment I told him, the investigation changed. I reached into my jacket and pulled out my badge. Miller stared at it. Then he looked at me again. You're a detective. I nodded. State Investigations Division. He exhaled slowly. Why didn't you tell me? Because I wasn't officially working this case? What case? I looked around the office. The property fraud case involving Evelyn Harper and several connected businesses. Miller's jaw tightened. You've been investigating the HOA president. Not just her. I picked up a folder from the floor. 3 developers, 2 shell companies, a title company employee, and possibly someone inside the county records office. Miller stared at the destroyed office. And you think the safe theft is connected? I don't think it. I pointed toward the open desk. I know it. Before we could say anything else, we heard an engine outside. Miller immediately stepped toward the barn entrance. A black pickup was racing down the gravel road. I recognized the truck. It belonged to Thomas Reed. One of the show board members. Miller stepped outside. Sheriff's Department, stop! The truck accelerated. Miller reached for his radio. Unit heading east on County Road 14, black Ford pickup, possible suspect fleeing private property. I ran toward my own truck. Miller shouted after me, "Don't chase him." I stopped. He was right. A chase would create more problems than it solved. Instead, I watched Thomas disappear around the bend. Then I looked at the barn. The missing hard drive bothered me, not because of the files, because of timing. The person who broke into my barn knew the HOA was going after my safe. That meant there had been coordination, and coordination meant planning. I walked back toward the house. Evelyn was standing beside her UV. The moment she saw me, she froze. "Where did you go?" I ignored her. "Where's Thomas Reed?" She blinked. "I don't know. He just left your property." My property? Was she realized her mistake? I smiled. "You're getting nervous." She crossed her arms. "You have no right to accuse me." "I haven't accused you of anything. You've been harassing the HOA for months." "Interesting." I pulled out my phone. "Because according to my records, the HOA has been harassing me." She stepped toward me. "You don't understand what you're dealing with." "I understand more than you think." Her face hardened. Then she whispered something that made my blood run cold. "You should have left this alone when we gave you the offer." I stared at her. "What offer?" She said nothing. I stepped closer. "What offer, Evelyn?" She looked toward the HOA lawyer. He immediately moved between us. "That's enough." I recognized him. Daniel Price, a corporate attorney who specialized in property disputes. He had represented the developer trying to purchase the land bordering my ranch. Now I understood another piece of the puzzle. The HOA wasn't acting alone. I looked at him. "Daniel." He gave me a polite smile. "Detective Carter." I stopped. He knew. That meant Evelyn had told him. Or worsey, they had known from the beginning. Miller noticed the exchange. "You two know each other." Daniel adjusted his tie. "We've met." "That's not what I asked." Daniel ignored him. Instead, he turned toward Evelyn. "We should leave." She nodded. As they walked away, I watched their vehicle disappear down the road. Miller came beside me. "Something tells me this isn't just an HOA dispute." "It isn't? Then what is it?" I looked at my ranch. "This land sits on an old utility corridor." Miller waited. "A development company wants to build a private logistics facility on the other side of the highway." He nodded. "And the easiest route for their access road crosses my eastern boundary." Miller's eyes narrowed. "You're saying they're trying to take your land?" "Not exactly." I pointed toward the pasture. "They're trying to make it look like I never owned part of it." That afternoon, I drove to the county records office. I needed the original survey, not a copy, the original. If someone had altered the digital property records, the paper archive would tell us where the change came from. The county clerk, Maria Alvarez, recognized me immediately. "Detective Carter." "Maria, I need the original survey for parcel 18B. She frowned. "That file is restricted." "Why?" She checked her computer. "Recent access." "By whom?" She hesitated, then looked at me. "Evelyn Harper." My heart sank. "When?" 2 weeks ago. "Anyone else?" Maria looked through the access log. "Thomas Reed." Then another name appeared. "Daniel Price." I leaned against the counter. All three had accessed the same property file. The same file connected to my ranch. "Maria, can you print the access history?" She shook her head. "Not without authorization." I showed her my badge. She still hesitated. Then she lowered her voice. "Come back after 5. I understood. Someone was watching. I left the office and sat in my truck across the street. For 20 minutes, nothing happened. Then a county maintenance vehicle pulled into the parking lot. A man stepped out. He didn't work for the county. I knew that because I had seen him before. He was one of the men from my driveway, one of the HO guards. He entered the records office. My phone buzzed. A message. "Ya uso el día vi huelga de huevo." I looked up. The guard was standing inside the county building, looking directly through the glass at me. Then he smiled. I started the truck. But instead of driving away, I called my supervisor. "Captain, I need an emergency case file opened." There was a pause. "What's happened?" "Attempted evidence theft, property fraud, unauthorized access to county records, and possible obstruction involving private security personnel." "Who?" I looked through the windshield. "Oh, a President Evelyn Harper." Another pause. "Are you personally involved?" "Less." "Then document everything and stay outside the investigation unless formally assigned." "I understand." "And Carter." "Less." "Don't underestimate this one." I hung up. That was exactly what I had been thinking. By sunset, I returned to the ranch. The safe was still sitting inside the HOA truck. The sheriff had ordered them not to move it until the matter was resolved. The guards were gone. Evelyn was gone. But someone had left something on my front porch. A small envelope, no name, no stamp. Inside was a photograph. It showed my barn, taken from the tree line. On the back, someone had written Gui Kanoa Buti Sikon C Safe. I stared at the words. There was only one problem. There wasn't a second safe, not officially. But there was something else. Something even Evelyn didn't know about. Years earlier, my father had built a hidden compartment beneath the floor of the old tack room. I had discovered it after his death. I had never told anyone. Not my neighbors, not the sheriff, not even my department. And that's where I'd stored the most sensitive evidence. I walked toward the barn. The sky had turned orange behind the trees. I unlocked the tack room, lifted the old wooden floor panel. The compartment was still there, empty. I froze. Someone had found it. My father had built that compartment decades before the OA existed. The person who found it couldn't have discovered it by accident. They had known exactly where to look. I reached inside and found only one thing. A folded piece of paper. I opened it. It was an old survey of the ranch, but someone had drawn a red circle around the eastern boundary. Underneath it were 4 words: Th Lun Ys Movid. I stared at the map. Then something clicked. The property fraud wasn't about the access road. It wasn't about the HOA rules. It wasn't even about my ranch. The altered boundary gave someone access to something beneath the land. Something that had existed long before the subdivision was built. I unfolded the map completely. A handwritten note appeared at the bottom. My father's handwriting. I recognized it immediately. If they ever come looking for this, don't trust the people who claim they own the land. I sat there in silence. My father had died 9 years earlier. He couldn't have known about Evelyn Harper. He couldn't have known about the HOA. Unless he'd known something else. Something I had never been told. I called my mother. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Son, Mom, I need to ask you something about Dad." She became quiet. "What happened? Did Dad ever tell you anything about the eastern pasture?" Silence. Longer this time. Then she said something I never expected. "Your father told me never to talk about it." My heart started pounding. Why? Because people had already tried to buy that land from him. "Ooh, I don't know. Mom." She took a breath. "Your father said they weren't interested in the ranch." I looked at the red circle on the survey. What were they interested in? Her voice dropped. Whatever was buried under it. I looked toward the eastern pasture. For years I had thought my father was simply protective of the land. Now I realized he had been protecting something else. Something powerful enough that people were willing to forge records, manipulate an HOA, break into my property, and steal an 800-pound safe. Then my mother said one final thing. "Your father once told me that if anyone ever came looking for the old boundary marker." She stopped. "What?" He said they would already know where it was. I looked outside. The sun was almost gone. And beyond the pasture, near the eastern fence line, a single flashlight appeared, moving slowly, coming toward my land. I grabbed my jacket. Then I noticed something else. The flashlight wasn't coming from the road. It was coming from inside my property. Someone was already here, and this time they weren't hiding. I killed the lights in the tack room and stayed completely still. The flashlight continued moving through the eastern pasture. Slow. Deliberate. Whoever carried it wasn't searching randomly. They were walking directly toward the old fence line. I checked my watch. Lenzen 47 p.m. I called Deputy Miller. He answered immediately. "Carter, someone is on my property." "Where?" "Eastern pasture." "I'll be there in 10. Don't come through the main gate." A pause. "Why?" "Because if they're watching the ranch, they'll see you coming." I ended the call. Then I grabbed my flashlight, left the barn through the rear door, and moved along the tree line. The person ahead stopped. The flashlight went dark. I stopped too. Nothing. Then a voice came from the darkness. "You shouldn't have come out here." I recognized it. Thomas Reed, the HOA board member. I stepped into the moonlight. "Neither should you." He laughed nervously. "You have no idea what's happening. I know you broke into my barn. I never touched your barn. You were seen leaving my property. That doesn't mean I broke in. Then tell me why you're here." Silence. Thomas looked toward the eastern fence. "Because you found something you weren't supposed to find." I kept my distance. "Was it?" He shook his head. "I don't know." "Then why are you here?" He looked genuinely frightened. "Because they told me to find the boundary marker." "Who?" He wouldn't answer. "Thomas." He finally looked at me. "Daniel Price." I wasn't surprised. But what he said next was, "Daniel works for someone else." "Who?" Thomas swallowed. "The developer." Before I could ask another question, headlights appeared in the distance. Thomas panicked. "They're here?" "Woo." He turned and ran. I didn't chase him. Instead, I watched the headlights. 2 black SUVs came through the private access road. Behind them was a county survey truck. That made no sense. The vehicles stopped near the eastern fence. 3 men got out. Then Evelyn Harper stepped from the first SUV. She looked toward my barn. She knew I was watching. I walked into the open. "Evelyn," she smiled. "Detective Carter, you're trespassing?" She folded her arms. "I'm conducting an authorized property inspection." "On private land, you've been notified." "No." I pointed toward the fence. "You've been warned." Daniel Price stepped out of the SUV. "Let's not make this difficult." I looked at him. "You brought a surveyor onto my property at midnight." He nodded toward the county truck. "The boundary needs verification." "Funny." I smiled. "Because I already verified it." Daniel's expression hardened. "With what?" I held up the old survey. "This." Evelyn stared at it. For the first time, she looked genuinely frightened. She recognized the document. "Where did you get that?" "From my father's records." Daniel immediately stepped toward me. "You need to hand that over." I laughed. "You're demanding my property? You don't understand its significance." "Oh, I understand now." I held up the map. "You changed the boundary." Nobody spoke. The surveyor looked at Daniel. Daniel looked at Evelyn. Evelyn looked at the ground. That was enough. I had my answer. Then a patrol vehicle came down the road. Deputy Miller stepped out with another deputy. "Everyone stay where you are." Evelyn immediately approached him. "Deputy, this is a misunderstanding." Miller looked at me. "Carter." I pointed toward the survey truck. "They're conducting an unauthorized survey on my land." Miller looked at the county surveyor. "Do you have written authorization?" The surveyor hesitated. Daniel answered. "We'll have an easement." "Show me." Daniel reached into his jacket. Miller read the document. Then looked at me. This easement doesn't cover this parcel. Daniel's face changed. Miller handed it back. Everyone off the property, Evelyn protested. You don't understand. Miller's voice became firm. I understand trespassing. The group slowly returned to the vehicles. Before Evelyn entered her SUV, she looked at me. This isn't over, I answered quietly. No. I held up the survey. Now it's just beginning. The next morning, I submitted the survey to my department. Within hours, investigators arrived. The case officially changed. What had started as an HOA dispute became a multi-agency investigation into fraudulent property filings, attempted evidence destruction, unlawful access to private property, and possible conspiracy. The first major breakthrough came from the county records office. Maria Alvarez handed investigators a sealed archive. Inside was the original property survey from decades earlier. The boundary had never moved. Someone had altered the digital records later, but the original document showed something else. The eastern section of my property contained an abandoned utility easement. Beneath it was an old underground service corridor, and according to historical county records, that corridor connected to a former industrial storage site. The site had been closed decades ago, but someone had recently purchased the surrounding land. The buyer, a company controlled through two shell corporations, and the registered attorney for one of those corporations was Daniel Price. The pieces finally connected. The developer wasn't trying to steal my ranch because they wanted houses. They wanted access to the underground corridor, and the easiest way to gain legal access was to make it appear that the eastern portion of my property had never belonged to me. The HOA was being used as pressure, code violations, fines, threats, property seizures. Everything was designed to make me sell. When I refused, they escalated. Then they learned I was investigating. That's when they went after the safe. But they made one critical mistake. They left the cameras running. My security system had captured the entire incident. The footage showed Evelyn ordering the guards to remove the safe. It showed Daniel arriving. It showed the fake enforcement document. And it showed the guards entering my property without permission. The evidence was undeniable. But the biggest surprise came 3 days later. Investigators recovered my stolen hard drive. It had been dumped in a drainage ditch outside the county. Most of the files were damaged, but one folder survived. Inside was a spreadsheet. Names, payments, bank transfers, the HOA board, a developer, a title company employee, and one county employee. The investigation expanded rapidly. Several people were arrested. Daniel Price surrendered through his attorney. Thomas Reed agreed to cooperate. And Evelyn Harper. She insisted she had done nothing wrong, until investigators showed her the video. Her face went pale. She looked at the screen, then at her attorney, then back at the footage. Finally, she whispered, I didn't know they were going to take the safe. The investigator asked her, then why did you order them to take it? She had no answer. Months later, I stood inside the county courthouse. The courtroom was packed. Neighbors filled the benches. Some had supported Evelyn. Others had quietly watched what happened to me. Now everyone wanted to know the truth. The prosecution presented the property records, the altered maps, the financial transfers, the surveillance footage, and finally the recording from my driveway. Evelyn's voice came through the courtroom speakers. Take the safe. The room became completely silent. Then the prosecutor played the next part. My voice. Put my safe back. Then Evelyn's. You don't get to decide that. The prosecutor paused the recording. He looked at the jury. That statement was made on private property, where the defendant had no legal authority to seize personal property. The evidence spoke for itself. The case ended with convictions and financial judgments against several people involved. The AA was placed under court supervision. Its board was removed. The fraudulent property filings were corrected, and the developer lost the land deal. But the moment that mattered most to me happened after the hearing. I walked outside the courthouse. Maria was waiting there. She handed me a folder. What is this? Your corrected property records. I opened it. The original boundary line was restored. Every acre, every fence, every section of the ranch. Mine. I looked across the parking lot. Several neighbors stood together. One of them, an elderly man named Walter, approached me. I owe you an apology. For what? I believed them. He looked down. They told us you were trying to destroy the neighborhood. I smiled. You weren't the first person they lied to. He shook my hand. You saved this community. I looked back toward the courthouse. No. I thought about my father, his old survey, his hidden compartment, the warning he had left behind. I just refused to let someone rewrite the truth. A year later, the HOA had completely changed. A new board was elected. New rules were written. Property rights were clarified. Independent audits became mandatory. And the ranch remained exactly as it had always been. The red barn, the wooden fences, the gravel road, the cattle, the old trees, and the eastern pasture where my father had once stood watching the sunset. I eventually restored the tack room. But I left the hidden compartment untouched, not because I expected trouble, because it reminded me of something. Power doesn't always come from money. Sometimes it comes from knowing the truth before everyone else does. And sometimes the people who think they're above the law make the biggest mistake of all. They assume the person standing in their way is helpless. Evelyn thought I was just a stubborn rancher. Her guards thought I was just another homeowner they could intimidate. Daniel thought paperwork could erase history. They were all wrong. Because when they came for my safe, they thought they were stealing evidence. They didn't realize they were creating evidence. The cameras, the recordings, the fake documents, the witnesses, their own mistakes. They had built the case for me. I stood outside my barn one evening, watching the sun disappear behind the pasture. The same pasture they had tried to take. I touched the old wooden fence. For years, I had thought protecting my property meant protecting a piece of land. I finally understood it meant protecting the truth attached to it. I looked toward the road one last time, then I smiled. Because the people who came to my house thinking they were above the law had learned the hardest lesson of all: you can steal a safe, but you can't steal the truth, and sooner or later, the truth always finds its way home.